Chapter 1. The Asymmetry of Peace. I tell you, Hastings, the countryside is a dangerous place. It is full of chaos, mud, and worst of all, chickens that do not understand the concept of silence. Hercule Poirot stared distastefully at his boiled egg. We were seated in the breakfast parlor of Rosewood Cottage, a charming little rental in the village of Hollow Creek, meant to be our escape from the soot and grime of London. The year was 1935, and the October morning was wrapped in a thick, gray mist that pressed against the window panes like a wet blanket. "Come now, Poirot," I said, buttering my toast with a bit more vigor than necessary. "It's fresh air. The lungs need it. Besides, Dr. Arbuthnot recommended you take a rest. No murders, no mysteries, just relaxation." Poirot sighed, adjusting his mustache with a napkin. "The good doctor understands anatomy, mon ami, but he does not understand the psychology of Hercule Poirot. My gray cells, they do not rest. They stagnate. And look at this egg. It is lopsided. A tragedy of nature." Our bickering was interrupted by a frantic knocking at the front door. It was not the polite rap of the milkman, nor the hesitant tap of the postman. It was a desperate, heavy pounding. Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Ah, it seems the countryside is not so sleepy after all." I rose and went to the door. Standing on the threshold, shivering despite his heavy tweed coat, was our nearest neighbor. We had only seen him from a distance across the high hedgerows, Mr. Elias Thorne. Thorne was a man of perhaps 50, though he looked 20 years older in the pale morning light. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and rimmed with red, and his silver hair was in disarray. He lived in Blackwood Manor, the imposing Victorian estate that loomed darkly on the hill just adjacent to our cottage. "Please," Thorne gasped, clutching his chest. "I saw the smoke from your chimney. I had nowhere else to turn. They say you are the detective, the little Belgian fellow?" "I am Hercule Poirot," my friend announced, appearing behind me, his posture suddenly rigid and dignified. "Entrez, monsieur. You look as though you have seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," Thorne whispered, stumbling into the warmth of our hallway. "Something worse, a nightmare that breathes." We ushered him into the parlor and settled him by the fire. Poirot poured a cup of strong tisane, which he preferred over tea, and Thorne drank it with trembling hands. "Now," Poirot said softly, leaning back in his armchair, his fingertips pressed together. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Why is a wealthy man like yourself running through the fog at 8 in the morning?" Elias Thorne took a deep breath. "It is my house, Mr. Poirot, or rather the people inside it. You see, I live with my younger brother Julian and his wife, Clara, and my stepdaughter Violet. It is a quiet house. Or it was." "Go on," I encouraged. "3 nights ago, it started," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a hush. "I sleep in the master bedroom on the 2nd floor. It locks from the inside. I always lock it. I have enemies in the business world, you understand. But 3 nights ago, I woke up feeling a weight on my chest. I couldn't breathe. The room was pitch black. Then I heard it." "Heard what?" Poirot asked, his eyes narrowing like a cat spotting a mouse. "A whisper," Thorne shuddered, "right next to my ear. It said, 'The debt is due, Elias.' I turned on the lamp immediately, but the room was empty. The door was still locked. The windows were latched." "A dream, surely," I suggested reasonably. "The mind plays tricks." Thorne shook his head violently. "That is what Julian said. That is what Clara said. But the next night, it happened again. The same weight, the same voice. But this time, when I turned on the light, I saw it." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a piece of fabric. It was a black silk handkerchief, knotted in the center. "This was on my pillow," Thorne said, his voice trembling. It was damp, smelling of formaldehyde, the smell of the morgue. Poirot took the handkerchief delicately with a pair of tweezers he produced from his pocket. He brought it to his nose and sniffed. "Oui," he murmured. "Chemicals. And something else. Lilies. The flower of funerals." "Last night was the worst," Thorne continued, tears welling in his eyes. "I didn't sleep. I sat up in a chair with a pistol in my lap. Around 3 a.m., the handle of my bedroom door began to turn. Slowly, quietly. I shouted, 'Who is there?' The turning stopped. I rushed to the door, unlocked it, and threw it open. The hallway was empty, but on the floor, right outside my threshold, was a wreath, a funeral wreath with my name on it. The fire crackled, casting long shadows across the room. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty window. "Someone is trying to drive me mad, mister." "Oh, Poirot," Thorne said, gripping the arms of the chair. "Or they are trying to kill me by stopping my heart with fear. My family. They think I am senile. They think I am losing my mind. But I know someone was there." Poirot stood up, smoothing his jacket. The boredom of the morning had vanished completely. His eyes shone with a green glint. "Monsieur Thorne," Poirot said gravely, "fear is a potent weapon. It leaves no fingerprints, and it uses the victim's own imagination against them. But Hercule Poirot does not believe in ghosts, and he certainly does not believe in locked doors that open themselves without keys." "Will you help me?" Thorne pleaded. "I will do better than that," Poirot said, checking his pocket watch. "Captain Hastings and I will accompany you back to Blackwood Manor immediately. I wish to see this funeral wreath. Oh, and I wish to meet this family of yours who sleeps so soundly, while the master of the house is tormented." Thorne looked relieved, but as he stood up, he glanced out the window toward his dark, looming manor on the hill. "Hurry, Mr. Poirot," he whispered. "I have a terrible feeling that the nightmare is not waiting for the night anymore." Little did we know, as we donned our coats and stepped out into the swirling fog, that we were walking not just into a mystery, but into a trap that had been set with terrifying precision. The nightmare had only just begun. Chapter 2. The House of Whispers. The walk up the hill to Blackwood Manor was a silent, somber affair. The fog had thickened, swirling around our ankles like spectral water. As the house emerged from the mist, I understood why Elias Thorne felt oppressed. It was a sprawling Victorian monstrosity of dark stone, complete with turrets that looked like jagged teeth biting into the gray sky. Ivy choked the walls, and the windows were narrow and uninviting, like eyes squinting in suspicion. "A house that frowns," Poirot murmured, grimacing as his patent leather shoes encountered a patch of mud. "It is not a happy house, Hastings. It holds its breath." Elias Thorne unlocked the heavy oak front door, his hands still trembling. We stepped into a cavernous entrance hall. The air inside was colder than the air outside, smelling faintly of old wax, damp wool, and something metallic. "Julian, Clara," Elias called out, his voice cracking slightly. A moment later, a door to the left opened, and a man stepped out. He bore a striking resemblance to Elias, but was clearly younger, and perhaps in his early 40s. He was dressed in a velvet smoking jacket that seemed too elegant for the hour. This was Julian Thorne. He held a billiard cue in one hand, his expression one of bored irritation. "Good heavens, Elias," Julian drawled, his eyes flicking over us. "You've been running about in the damp again, and you've brought company?" "This is Monsieur Hercule Poirot," Elias said, straightening his back in an attempt to regain some dignity. "And Captain Hastings. They are here to investigate the threats against my life." Julian let out a short, sharp laugh. "Threats? Oh, Elias, please, not the ghost story again. I told you, it's the brandy. You're having nightmares." A woman followed Julian out of the room. She was striking, with sharp cheekbones and hair cropped in a fashionable bob. She wore a silk dress that rustled like dry leaves as she moved. Clara Thorne, Julian's wife. "Detective?" Clara raised a perfectly plucked eyebrow. "Is that necessary? We are trying to keep Elias's episodes private, for the sake of the family business." "Murder is rarely a private affair, madame," Poirot said smoothly, bowing slightly. "And fear is a disease that spreads. I am here to cure it." Clara's eyes narrowed. She did not like him, I could tell immediately. She looked at Elias with a mixture of pity and contempt. "Very well, but please, try not to upset the servants. It is hard enough to keep staff in this gloomy place." "I wish to see the scene of the incident," Poirot announced, ignoring her hostility. "The bedroom and the wreath." Elias led us up the grand staircase. The carpet was threadbare in places, a sign that the Thorne family fortune might not be as robust as the house suggested. We reached the second-floor landing, a long, dimly lit corridor lined with portraits of ancestors who all seemed to be glaring at us. "Here," Elias whispered, pointing to a heavy wooden door at the end of the hall. "My room." On the floor, just outside the door, lay the wreath. It was not a large arrangement, but it was grotesque. Dead white lilies were woven together with black ribbon. A small card was pinned to the center. Poirot crouched down, not touching it yet, his head cocked to one side like a bird. "Read the card, Hastings," he commanded. I leaned closer. In jagged block letters, written in red ink, were the words, "Time is a thief, and so are you." "Cryptic," I muttered, "and nasty." "But very specific," Poirot said, standing up. "Sir, this is not the work of a ghost, Hastings. Ghosts do not buy ribbon from the haberdashery, nor do they use fountain pens. This is a human hand, a hand that hates." He turned to the door handle. "Show me, Monsieur Thorne. How do you lock it?" Elias produced a heavy iron key. "It is an old lock, but strong. I turn it twice." Poirot took the key and examined the mechanism. He locked the door from the outside, then unlocked it. He did this 3 times, his green eyes scanning the wood, the hinges, and the floorboards. "There are no scratches on the lock," Poirot noted. "No sign of picking. If someone entered your room while you slept, monsieur, they did not force their way in. They had a key." "Impossible," Elias cried. "There is only one key. I keep it on a chain around my neck, even when I bathe." "Interesting," Poirot murmured. He pushed the door open, and we entered the bedroom. It was a large, oppressive room with heavy velvet curtains drawn tight. A 4-poster bed dominated the space. Poirot moved to the window, pulling back the curtains. The view looked down a sheer drop to a stone courtyard below. "No entry from the window," I observed, "unless the intruder was a bird." Poirot did not answer. He was busy inspecting the bedside table. He picked up a glass of water, sniffing it, then moved to the fireplace. The grate was cold and empty. Suddenly, a soft sound came from the doorway. We turned to see a young woman standing there. She was pale, almost translucent, with large, frightened eyes and long, unkempt hair. She clutched a book to her chest. "Violet," Elias said softly. "This is my stepdaughter." Violet looked at Poirot, or then at the wreath still lying in the hallway behind her. She didn't speak, but her hands trembled. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, "you are awake early." "I heard voices," she whispered. Her voice was melodic, but incredibly sad. "Father, is the bad man back?" "There is no bad man, Violet," Elias said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Just dreams." Violet took a step into the room. She looked at Poirot with an intensity that was unsettling. "It's not a dream," she said, her voice gaining a sudden, strange strength. "I hear him too. He walks in the walls. He whispers about the money." "The money?" Poirot asked sharply. "The money that is gone?" Violet said, her eyes drifting to the empty fireplace. "The house is hungry. It eats everything." Before we could ask more, Clara appeared in the doorway, looking flustered. "Violet, go to your room. You are bothering the guests." Violet shrank back, the strange strength vanishing instantly. She scurried away down the hall like a frightened animal. Clara turned to us, a tight smile on her lips. "Forgive her. She is imaginative, like her stepfather." Poirot watched Clara closely. "Imagination is a powerful thing, madame, but it cannot place a funeral wreath at a door." He walked back to the hallway and picked up the wreath with his handkerchief. As he lifted it, something small fell from the dead flowers and landed on the carpet with a soft clink. It was a button. A small, distinctive gold button with a naval anchor design. Poirot picked it up, his eyes narrowing. "Hastings," he said quietly, holding the button up to the light. "I believe I have seen a button like this very recently." I gasped. "Yes, Poirot. Just downstairs, on the smoking jacket of Julian Thorne." Poirot closed his hand over the button. "The plot, it thickens, mon ami. But remember, in a house of shadows, the obvious answer is often the trap." He turned to Elias. "Monsieur Thorne, I advise you not to sleep in this room tonight. Tonight you will sleep in the library, and Captain Hastings and we shall keep watch." Elias nodded, looking terrified. But as I looked down the dark corridor, I felt a heavy sense of dread. The button was too easy, too convenient, and the look in Violet's eyes haunted me. The nightmare was not just about a debt. It was about a family rotting from the inside out. Chapter 3. The Vigil in the Velvet Dark. The library of Blackwood Manor was a room designed for secrets. Walls of dark mahogany were lined with books that smelled of dust and decay. A heavy velvet curtain hid the tall French windows that looked out onto the storm-swept terrace. Outside, the wind had picked up, howling through the eaves like a chorus of mourners. It was just past midnight. Elias Thorne lay on a leather Chesterfield sofa, covered in a wool blanket, his breathing shallow and jagged. He was asleep, but fitfully. I sat in a wing-back chair, struggling to keep my eyes open. My revolver lay in my lap, heavy and cold. Opposite me, Hercule Poirot sat perfectly upright, his eyes wide open, staring into the dying embers of the fireplace. He looked like a statue, save for the occasional twitch of his nose. "You really think it is Julian?" I whispered, trying not to wake Elias. "The button was quite damning, Poirot. He needs money. Elias has money. It's a classic motive. Poirot turned his egg-shaped head slowly toward me. It fits, Hastings. It fits beautifully, like a puzzle piece that slides into place with no effort. And that is why I do not like it. You don't like it because it's easy? I do not like it because it is theatrical, Poirot corrected. A funeral wreath, a whisper in the dark, a button conveniently dropped. These are the actions of a stage villain, not a calculating murderer. Someone is putting on a show for us, mon ami. The question is, who is in the audience, and who is behind the curtain? A sudden crack of thunder shook the window panes. Elias groaned in his sleep, muttering unintelligible words. "The debt," Elias mumbled. "Paid in full." "He is dreaming of his sins," Poirot murmured. "Every rich man has them." The clock on the mantelpiece chimed the half-hour. Dong, dong. The sound seemed incredibly loud in the silence that followed the thunder. Then the lights flickered. The electric bulbs in the wall sconces buzzed angrily, dimmed to a dull orange, and then died completely. We were plunged into absolute darkness. "Stay where you are, Hastings." Poirot's voice was sharp, cutting through the blackness. "I can't see a thing," I hissed, fumbling for the box of matches in my pocket. From the sofa, a terrified shriek erupted. It was Elias. "Get away! Get away from me!" I struck a match. The sudden flare of light was blinding for a second. I held it up, my hand shaking. The library was a scene of chaos. The French windows, which had been locked, were blown wide open, and the heavy curtains billowing wildly into the room like ghosts. Rain lashed inside, soaking the expensive Persian rug. But it was Elias who drew my horror. He was sitting up, pressing himself against the back of the sofa, his face white as a sheet. "He touched me!" Elias screamed, pointing at the open window. "A cold hand, right on my face." Poirot was already moving. He produced a powerful electric torch from his pocket. Poirot was always prepared, and swept the beam across the room. He ran to the open doors and stepped out onto the wet terrace, the beam cutting through the rain. I rushed to the light switch, flipping it up and down. Nothing. The fuse had blown. "Is he there?" I shouted over the wind. Poirot stepped back inside, closing the doors and locking them firmly. He looked grim. His patent leather shoes were wet, ruining their shine, a tragedy for him usually, but he didn't seem to care. "Gone," Poirot said, dissolved into the night. He walked over to the sofa where Elias was trembling violently. Poirot shone the light on Elias's face. On the old man's left cheek, stark against the pale skin, was a smear. It was wet mud, a perfect imprint of a gloved thumb. "You see?" Elias sobbed. "I told you, it is not a dream." "No," Poirot said, his voice dangerously low. "It is flesh and blood. Hastings, bring the light here. Look at the floor." I brought the dying match closer, then lit another. On the wet patch of the rug near the window, there was a footprint. It was muddy, yes, but it was not the footprint of a large man. It was small, narrow. The print of a delicate shoe, perhaps a woman's, or a small man's. "Violet," I breathed. "Or a very slender man," Poirot corrected. He knelt down, examining the mud. "But look closely, Hastings. What is missing?" I squinted. "It looks like a normal footprint." "No, it is a bare footprint inside a shoe. The pressure is uneven. Whoever wore this shoe, the shoe was too big for them." My head spun. Someone wearing shoes that don't fit? Why? To disguise their stride, to change their height, or... Poirot stood up, dusting his knees. "To leave a footprint that leads us to the wrong person." Suddenly, the library door creaked open. A beam of light from a candle cut into the room. It was Julian Thorne, wearing a silk robe, holding a candlestick. Behind him stood Clara, looking annoyed. "What on earth is this racket?" Julian demanded. "Screaming? Banging? Is this part of your investigation, detective?" "The lights have been cut," Poirot said calmly, turning the beam of his torch onto Julian's face. Julian flinched. "And your brother was attacked." "Attacked?" Clara stepped forward, tightening her robe. "By whom?" "That is what we intend to find out," Poirot said. "Tell me, Monsieur Julian, where were you 5 minutes ago?" "In bed, of course," Julian snapped. "Asleep, until Elias started howling like a banshee." "And you, madame?" "I was in my room," Clara said coldly. "Reading." "Strange," Poirot murmured. He moved the light down. "Because, Monsieur Julian, the hem of your sleeping robe, it is wet." Julian looked down. The bottom inch of his velvet robe was indeed dark with moisture. I must have spilled water from my nightstand when I heard the scream," Julian stammered, his face flushing. "Perhaps," Poirot said. "Or perhaps the rain outside is very heavy tonight." He turned back to Elias, who was still clutching the blanket. "The night is over for sleeping, I think. Hastings, stoke the fire. We will wait for the dawn. And when the sun comes up, I have a telephone call to make to London. I need to know exactly who stands to gain from the death of Elias Thorne, and exactly how much." As I threw a log onto the dying embers, I looked at the muddy footprint again. A shoe, too big. A wet robe. A missing button. The clues were piling up, but they pointed in too many directions. And in the shadows of the library, I felt the distinct sensation that we were being watched, not by a ghost, but by a very clever, very dangerous hunter. Chapter 4. The Girl in the Glass. House. The storm had exhausted itself by morning, I leaving behind a sky of bruised purple and gray. Blackwood Manor, bathed in the weak light of dawn, looked less like a castle and more like a mausoleum. Inside, breakfast was a silent, suffocating affair. Elias Thorne sat at the head of the long table, looking 10 years older than he had yesterday. He barely touched his porridge. Julian and Clara ate with mechanical precision, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Poirot, however, was surprisingly chipper. He was buttering a piece of toast with the precision of a diamond cutter. "The coffee, it is an abomination," Poirot announced cheerfully. "But the marmalade is acceptable. Now, if you will excuse us, Monsieur Thorne, Captain Hastings and I wish to tour the grounds. Fresh air clears the mind, does it not?" Elias nodded vaguely. "Do as you please, detective. I'll find who is doing this." We left the dining room, but instead of going outside, Poirot pulled me sharply into the alcove under the stairs. "We are not going for a walk, Hastings," I whispered. "We are going to hunt, mon ami," he whispered back, his eyes twinkling. "But first, we divide the herd. I want you to speak to the brother, Julian. Ask him about his debts. Be blunt. He is a man who cracks under pressure." "And you?" "I go to find the little bird," Poirot said. "Mademoiselle Violet. She was not at breakfast. I believe she holds the key to this cage." I watched him slip away toward the back of the house, moving with that peculiar, mincing gait of his. I straightened my tie and went to find Julian. I found him in the billiard room, nursing a glass of whiskey despite it being 9 a.m. When I confronted him about his gambling debts, a guess Poirot had made, He crumbled instantly. "It's not my fault," Julian whined, slamming his glass down. "Elias controls everything, the estate, the trust fund, even my wife's allowance. I owe people in London, dangerous people. If Elias dies, the money comes to me. I won't lie about that. But I didn't try to scare him to death. I'm a desperate man, Captain, not a murderer." His confession was pathetic, but it rang true. Julian seemed too weak to orchestrate such a theatrical terror campaign. Meanwhile, Hercule Poirot had made his way to the Victorian conservatory at the rear of the manor. It was a humid, glass-walled jungle of ferns and exotic plants. The air smelled of damp earth and rotting vegetation. There, kneeling in the dirt, was Violet. She was digging with her bare hands, and her expensive dress stained with soil. She didn't look up as Poirot approached. "The earth is warm," she murmured to herself. "It keeps secrets better than people." "Mademoiselle Violet," Poirot said softly. She froze, then slowly turned. Her eyes were wide, the pupils dilated. Up close, Poirot noticed something disturbing. Her fingernails were broken and dirty, and there were scratches on her arms. "You are planting flowers?" Poirot asked, gesturing to the hole she was digging. "No," Violet whispered. "I am burying them. Dead things should stay dead. But father, he won't let them rest." Poirot took a step closer. "You call Elias father, but he is your stepfather, non? Your mother. She passed away recently?" A shadow crossed Violet's face. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. It transformed her fragile features into something sharp and dangerous. "She didn't pass away," Violet hissed. "She withered, like a plant without water. He stopped her medicine. He said it was too expensive. He said she was getting better." She let out a dry, chilling laugh. "She screamed for 3 days before she died. Elias didn't even call the doctor." Poirot remained impassive, but his mind was racing. Motive, a motive far stronger than money. Revenge. "That is a terrible burden to carry, mademoiselle," Poirot said. "But tell me, why do you wear those shoes?" Violet looked down. She was wearing heavy, oversized gardening boots. They were men's boots. "My shoes were taken," she said simply. "All of them, from my closet, 2 days ago." "Taken?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "By whom?" "By the ghost," she said, and her voice drifting back into dreaminess. "The ghost needs to walk quietly. My shoes are small. They make no sound." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The footprint in the library, the one with the uneven pressure. A shoe too big. "One last question, mademoiselle," Poirot said, leaning in. "Last night, when the lights went out, where were you?" Violet smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I was in the walls, Monsieur Poirot. I am always in the walls, listening." She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out something. She held it out to Poirot. It was a key, an old iron key. "I found this," she whispered, "under Clara's pillow." Poirot took the key. He recognized it immediately. It was a duplicate of the key Elias wore around his neck, the key to the locked bedroom. "Clara?" Poirot asked. "She hates him too," Violet said, returning to her digging. "But she wants the gold. I just want the silence." Poirot pocketed the key and turned to leave. As he walked back toward the main house to find me, his face was grave. "Hastings," he said when we reunited in the hallway. "The case, it is turned upside down." "Did you talk to her?" I asked. "I did, and she has given us a very dangerous gift." Poirot showed me the key. A duplicate key to the master bedroom, found, she claims, in the bed of Clara Thorne. Good Lord, so it's Clara, I exclaimed. She and Julian are in it together. It would seem so, Poirot said. But Hastings, if Violet is always in the walls, as she says, and if her shoes were stolen, then why are her hands covered in the same red clay found near the library window? I stared at him. You think she's lying? I think, Poirot said, on looking back at the foggy glass of the conservatory, that in this house everyone is a victim and everyone is a monster. But we have missed one crucial detail, a detail about the ghost that Elias mentioned. What detail? Poirot tapped his temple. The smell, Hastings. Elias said the handkerchief smelled of formaldehyde. The morgue. Neither Julian nor Clara have access to such chemicals. But do you know who does? Before I could answer, a scream rang out from the floor above. It was a woman's scream, high, piercing, and abruptly cut short. Clara, I shouted. Poirot was already running up the stairs with surprising speed. Vite, Hastings, the nightmare is striking in daylight. We rushed to the landing, but we were too late to stop the violence. We were only in time to see the consequences. But Chapter 5. The Scent of Silence. The door to Clara Thorne's bedroom was locked, but the panic in the air gave Hercule Poirot a strength that belied his age. With a heavy shoulder slam from myself, the wood splintered and the door swung open. The scene that greeted us was one of calculated violence. The room was in shambles. Dresser drawers had been pulled out, their contents, silk stockings, jewelry, letters, strewn across the floor like the entrails of the furniture. A heavy porcelain vase lay shattered near the fireplace, and in the center of the chaos lay Clara Thorne. She was sprawled on the Persian rug, her fashionable bob hair matted with blood on the left side. She was motionless. Bon Dieu, Poirot whispered, rushing to her side. He dropped to his knees, disregarding the dust on his trousers, and pressed 2 fingers against her neck. I stood by the door, my revolver drawn, scanning the room for the attacker. Is she? She lives, Hastings, Poirot said, his voice tight. But her pulse is thready. She has been struck with great force, a blunt instrument. He pointed to the fireplace. A heavy brass poker lay on the hearthrug, stained with a dark, wet patch. The weapon was improvised, Poirot noted. This was a crime of passion, or perhaps desperation. Just then, heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. Julian Thorne burst into the room, his face pale, his eyes wide. "Clara!" he screamed, throwing himself down beside his wife. "What happened? Who did this?" Poirot watched the man closely. "That is the question, Monsieur Julien. Where were you when you heard the scream?" I was in the library," Julian stammered, his hands hovering over his wife's unconscious form. "I was looking for a book on legal matters. I heard her cry out and ran straight here. Did you pass anyone on the stairs?" "No, no one." Julian looked up, tears streaming down his face. "Is she going to die?" "We must move her to the bed and call for a doctor immediately," Poirot commanded. "Hastings, help him." As Julian and I lifted Clara's limp body, Poirot began to circle the room. He moved like a hound, sniffing the air. The room was thick with the scent of Clara's expensive perfume, but underneath it, that same sickly, sweet odor lingered. Formaldehyde and lilies. Poirot stopped at the dressing table. It had been ransacked. The jewelry box was overturned, but the diamond necklace inside had not been taken. "Robbery was not the motive," Poirot murmured. "The thief left diamonds but took—" "What?" He picked up a small velvet-lined box. It was empty. The indentation in the velvet suggested something small and rectangular had been there. A small notebook? A stack of letters? "Hastings," Poirot called me over once Clara was settled. "Look at this mirror." I turned to the vanity mirror. Written on the glass in a greasy red substance, lipstick, was a single word: silence. "A warning," I said, feeling a chill. "To keep her quiet about the debt?" "Or perhaps," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing, "she knew who the ghost was, and she was about to tell." Poirot turned his attention back to the bed. He leaned over Clara, examining her hands. Her fingernails were perfectly manicured, unlike Violet's. But then Poirot noticed something caught in the lace of Clara's sleeve. He pulled out a pair of tweezers and extracted a small, dried leaf. "A fern," Poirot whispered. "A specific type of fern that grows only in high humidity." "The conservatory," I exclaimed, "where Violet was digging." Poirot held the leaf up to the light. "Precisely. But Violet is a small, frail girl. Could she strike a woman like Clara with such force? And why?" "Because Clara had the key," I reminded him. "Violet told us she found the key under Clara's pillow. Maybe Clara caught her stealing it back?" Poirot shook his head slowly. "Non, Hastings, it does not fit. If Violet found the key before we arrived, why attack Clara now? And remember, Violet gave the key to me. Why would she return to the room?" He walked over to the window. It was latched from the inside. "The attacker did not leave through the window," Poirot said. "And Julian says he passed no one on the stairs. This means the attacker is either still on this floor, or they have vanished into thin air." Suddenly, a soft, rhythmic thumping sound came from the wardrobe in the corner of the room. Thump, thump, thump. Julian froze. "What is that?" I raised my gun again. Poirot motioned for silence. He approached the large oak wardrobe slowly. The thumping grew louder, more desperate. With a swift motion, Poirot threw the wardrobe doors open. Inside, huddled among the fur coats, was Elias Thorne. The master of the house was shaking uncontrollably. His eyes rolled back in his head. He was clutching a bottle of brandy to his chest, mumbling nonsense. "Elias!" Julian shouted. "What are you doing in here?" Elias looked at us, but he didn't seem to see us. He looked past us. At the writing on the mirror. He was here, Elias whispered, his voice cracking. "The man with the face of wax. He came for her. He said the debt must be paid in blood." "Did you see him, Elias?" Poirot demanded, grabbing the old man by the shoulders. "Did you see who struck her?" Elias nodded slowly, a horrific grin spreading across his face. "It was me," Elias cackled. "It was my face. I saw myself do it." I lowered my gun, stunned. "He's gone mad, completely mad." "Or," Poirot said, releasing Elias and standing up straight, his face grim, "he is the only one seeing the truth. Hastings, we must lock this room. No one enters, no one leaves. The police are coming. But until they arrive, I am the law in this house." He looked at the fern leaf in his hand, then at the lipstick on the mirror, and finally at the open door. "The game has changed, mon ami," Poirot said quietly. "We are no longer looking for a ghost. We are looking for a mirror that shows a monster." Chapter 6. The Roots of the Manor. The local constabulary arrived an hour later, led by Inspector Japp, an old acquaintance of Poirot's from Scotland Yard, who happened to be in the county for a fishing trip. Japp was a solid, unimaginative man who viewed complex crimes with the suspicion one might reserve for a bad oyster. "So, let me get this straight, Poirot," Jap said, scratching his chin as he looked at the unconscious form of Clara being loaded onto a stretcher. The old man, Elias, claims he saw himself do it, and the girl, Violet, thinks ghosts are stealing her shoes? It sounds like a case for the asylum, not the police. It is a case for the eyes, Jap, Poirot corrected, tapping his own forehead. What we see is not what is. Elias saw a face that looked like his own. That does not mean it was his own. Well, we've sedated him, Jap grunted. He's in his room under guard. The brother, Julian, is downstairs crying into a whiskey bottle. And the girl... Where is the girl? Poirot froze. Violet? She was not in her room? Empty, Jap said. Maid said she hasn't seen her since breakfast. Hastings, Poirot barked, spinning around. The conservatory, the leaf found on Clara's sleeve. It was a fern. We must go back to where Violet was digging. We left Jap barking orders at his men and hurried through the house. The afternoon light was fading, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floors. When we reached the conservatory, it was empty. The hole Violet had been digging earlier was still there, a dark wound in the earth. But next to it, the door to the gardening shed was slightly ajar. Careful, Hastings, Poirot whispered. He pushed the door open with his cane. The shed was cluttered with pots, rakes, and bags of soil. But in the corner, hidden behind a stack of burlap sacks, was a narrow wooden door set into the floor. A trapdoor. A cellar entrance, I noted. Not on the blueprints? Victorian houses often have secrets, mon ami, Poirot said. He lifted the heavy iron ring. The trapdoor groaned open, revealing a set of stone steps descending into darkness. A smell wafted up, damp, earthy, and chemical. Formaldehyde. The source, Poirot murmured. He produced his trusty torch. Stay close. We descended. The air grew colder with every step. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a low-ceilinged stone chamber. It was not a wine cellar. It was a workshop. See, along the walls were shelves lined with jars. Inside the jars, floating in cloudy liquid, were preserved specimens. Frogs, birds, small rodents. Good Lord, I gagged, covering my nose. It's a taxidermy lab. In the center of the room stood a large workbench. On it lay tools, scalpels, needles, spools of wire. And in the corner, sitting on a wooden stool, rocking back and forth, was Violet. She was holding something in her lap. A mask. It was a crude, terrifying thing made of wax and papier-mâché. It had been painted to resemble a human face, wrinkled skin, gray eyebrows, a thin mouth. It was the face of Elias Thorne. Violet looked up as our light hit her. She didn't scream. She smiled, a sweet, vacant smile. I found his face, she whispered, stroking the mask. He took it off and left it here. Poirot moved slowly toward the workbench. He didn't look at Violet. He looked at the other items on the table. There was a ledger open to a page of accounts, and next to it, a bottle of industrial-strength formaldehyde. Violet, Poirot said gently. Who works down here? Who makes these things? The artist, Violet said dreamily. He makes them beautiful. He makes them stay forever. He wanted to make Mother stay forever, too. But she rotted. The artist? I asked. Who is the artist? Before she could answer, a shadow detached itself from the darkness behind a row of shelves. I believe, a smooth voice said, she is referring to me. We spun around. Standing there, holding a scalpel that glinted in the torchlight, was Julian Thorne. But the Julian we saw now was not the pathetic, whining man from upstairs. His posture was straight, his eyes cold and calculating. The smell of whiskey was gone. You found my little hobby, Julian said, running a thumb along the edge of the blade. I always had a talent for preservation. Elias never appreciated it. He thought it was morbid. You made the mask, Poirot said, his voice steady. You wore it to terrify your brother, to make him think he was losing his mind, to drive him to a heart attack. A heart attack is so much cleaner than murder, don't you think? Julian sneered. No police, no messy investigation, just a tragic end for a tired old man, and the inheritance falls to the grieving brother. And the wreath? Poirot asked. The whispering? Theatrics, Julian shrugged. Fear softens the arteries. I needed his heart to fail, but he's stubborn. The old goat just wouldn't die. So you attacked your own wife? I shouted, appalled. Why? Julian's face twisted into a scowl. Clara? Stupid, greedy Clara. She found the mask. She found this room. She was going to blackmail me. She wanted a bigger cut of the inheritance. She didn't understand. I don't share. He took a step toward us. And now, you two have found it too. You cannot kill us all, monsieur, Poirot said calmly, though I saw his hand tighten on his cane. Inspector Japp is upstairs. Japp is a fool, Julian spat. By the time he finds you down here, it will look like an accident. A tragic fall down the stairs for the nosy detective and his friend. He lunged. I raised my revolver, but Julian was faster than I expected. He threw a jar of formaldehyde at me. It shattered against the wall, splashing the stinging liquid into my eyes. I cried out, blinded, my gun firing wildly into the ceiling. "Oh, Hastings!" Poirot shouted. I heard the scuffle of feet, the crash of a table overturning, and Violet's high-pitched scream. "No! Don't hurt the pretty man!" I wiped my eyes frantically, my vision swimming. Through the blur, I saw Julian looming over Poirot, the scalpel raised high. Poirot was on the ground, his cane useless against the blade. "Goodbye, detective," Julian hissed. But before the blade could fall, a small, dark shape launched itself at Julian. It was Violet. She tackled him with the ferocity of a wild cat, sinking her teeth into his arm. Julian howled in pain and dropped the scalpel. "Run, monsieur!" Violet screamed. Poirot scrambled back, grabbing a heavy glass jar from the shelf, a preserved owl, and swung it with all his might. Crash. The jar connected with Julian's head. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious, surrounded by glass and pickling fluid. I stood there, blinking tears and chemicals from my eyes, my heart pounding against my ribs. Violet was huddled in the corner again, shaking. Poirot straightened his jacket, though he was covered in dust and grime. He looked down at the unconscious Julian. "The artist," Poirot panted, "has completed his final work, a self-portrait of a villain." He turned to Violet and bowed low. "Mademoiselle, you have saved the life of Hercule Poirot. For this, I am eternally in your debt." But as we looked around the grim cellar, with its dead eyes watching from jars and the mask of Elias Thorne staring up from the floor, I knew the mystery wasn't quite over. Julian was the villain, yes. But why did Violet have the duplicate key? And what did she mean about staying forever? The storm outside had passed, but the darkness in Blackwood Manor ran deeper than we could have imagined. Chapter 7. The Puzzle with a Missing Piece. The cellar was soon swarming with uniformed men. Inspector Japp stood over the handcuffed form of Julian Thorne, shaking his head with a mixture of disgust and professional satisfaction. "A taxidermist," Japp grunted, kicking a jar of preserved beetles aside. "I've seen some queer things in my time, Poirot, but a man making a mask of his own brother's face to scare him to death. That's a special kind of twisted. Greed twists the soul into strange shapes, Jap, Poirot said quietly. He was dabbing a cut on his forehead with a handkerchief. Julian Thorne was impatient. He could not wait for nature to take its course, so he decided to become the architect of death. Julian, now conscious but groggy, has glared at us from the floor. He deserved it, he spat. Elias sat on that fortune like a dragon on gold. He let the house rot. He let us rot. And your wife? Poirot asked sharply. Did she deserve the iron poker? Julian looked away. She found me out. She came down here looking for wine and found the mask instead. She laughed. She actually laughed. She said she would tell Elias, unless I gave her half the inheritance. I just wanted her to stop laughing. Take him away, Jap ordered. 2 constables hauled Julian up the stone steps. As the commotion died down, I turned to Poirot. Well, Poirot, that wraps it up. A nasty business, but at least the ghost is laid to rest. Poirot did not smile. He was watching Violet. She was sitting on a crate, staring at her dirt-stained hands, humming a tune that had no melody. Is it? Hastings? Poirot murmured. Is the ghost truly gone? What do you mean? Julian confessed. He admitted to the mask, the wreath, the attack on Clara. Oui. Poirot nodded slowly. He admitted to the physical acts, the theatrical terrors. But there are loose threads, mon ami, threads that do not weave into Julian's tapestry. Such as? The shoes, Poirot said. Julian is a man of vanity. You saw his velvet jackets, his perfectly combed hair. Why would such a man steal a young girl's shoes and wear them to make footprints? It is clumsy. It is undignified. And the key. Violet said she found the key under Clara's pillow. But Julian had no reason to give the key to Clara if he intended to frame a ghost. Why involve his wife? Perhaps he was careless, I suggested. Julian Thorne is cruel, Hastings, but he is not careless. He is a craftsman. Look at the mask. It is precise. The footprints. They were chaotic. Poirot walked over to Violet. He knelt down so he was eye-level with her. Mademoiselle, he said softly, the bad man is gone. You are safe. Violet looked at him. Her eyes were clear for the first time, though filled with a profound sadness. He is gone? The one who makes the faces? Yes, but I must ask you, Violet. The whispers. You said you heard whispers in the walls. Did they sound like Julian? Violet frowned. She tilted her head. Sometimes. Sometimes it was the man's voice, but sometimes it was the house. The house. The house remembers, Violet whispered. It remembers the debt. What debt, Violet? The life for a life, she said simply. Mother died so Elias could keep his money. So the money must die for Elias. Poirot stood up, his face grave. He turned to me. Hastings, we must speak to Elias Thorne, immediately. There is a history here that Julian's greed has overshadowed. We went back upstairs. The main hall of Blackwood Manor felt different now, emptier, colder. We found Elias in the library, wrapped in blankets, sipping tea that a maid had brought him. He looked frail, a shell of a man. They told me, Elias said, his voice trembling. Julian, my own brother. I knew he was weak, but I didn't think he was evil. He has been arrested, monsieur, Poirot said, taking a seat opposite him. But I fear he is not the only tragedy in this house. Tell me about Violet's mother. Tell me about the debt. Elias flinched. He put his teacup down. It rattled against the saucer. That is ancient history. Oh, Violet's mother, Sarah. She was a sickly woman. I married her late in life. She brought Violet with her. And her illness? A rare condition. Elias sighed. The treatment was experimental, expensive, and ultimately futile. I stopped the payments for the Swiss doctors because they were charlatans. They were bleeding me dry. And she died, Poirot stated. She died, Elias agreed, looking at the floor. And Violet, she never forgave me. She was only a child, but she screamed that I had killed her. I see, Poirot said. He leaned back, putting his fingertips together. So we have a house of hate. Julian hated you for the money. Clara hated you for the control. And Violet. Violet is simple, Elias dismissed. She lives in a fantasy world. Does she? Poirot's voice was sharp. Or does she see things you refuse to acknowledge? Tell me, monsieur, did Julian know about the exact wording of the note on the wreath? Time is a thief, and so are you. Elias blinked. I suppose so. Why? Because, Poirot said, standing up and pacing the room. That phrase, time is a thief, is a very poetic line. It is not the language of a man who stuffs dead birds in a cellar. It is the language of someone who reads, someone who mourns. Poirot stopped at the bookshelf. He pulled out a volume of poetry. He opened it and showed the flyleaf to Elias. Inscribed on the first page, in faded ink, was, "To my darling Sarah, time is a thief, but love is eternal." "Your handwriting, monsieur?" Poirot asked. Elias went pale. "Yes, I gave that to Sarah years ago." So, Poirot closed the book with a snap. The person who wrote the note on the wreath knew this phrase. Oh, they knew it would hurt you specifically. Julian wanted to scare you with ghosts, but someone else wanted to hurt you with memories. I stared at Poirot. Are you saying there was a second person? I am saying, Hastings, that two currents can flow in the same river. Julian was the shark, attacking violently. But there is an undercurrent, someone who moved the keys, someone who whispered about debts, someone who wanted you to feel guilt. Elias, not just fear. Just then, the library door creaked open. We all turned. It was not a person. It was a pair of shoes, small, muddy gardening boots. They had been placed neatly in the center of the doorway. "Violet," I whispered. "No," Poirot said, his eyes widening as he looked past the shoes into the shadows of the hallway. "Not Violet. Violet is still with the police officers. Look closely. Hastings, those are not the boots Violet was wearing in the cellar. Those are children's shoes." A cold draft swept through the library, extinguishing the candles once again. But this time, it wasn't a trick of wires or fuses. From the darkness of the hallway, a voice spoke. It was not Julian's voice. It was not Violet's. It was a voice that sounded like dry leaves skittering on stone. "The debt is not paid, Elias. The shark is caught, but the water is still deep." Poirot grabbed his torch and shone it into the hall. It was empty. For the first time since I had known him, Hercule Poirot looked truly unsettled. "Hastings," he whispered, "we have caught the criminal, but I fear we have not caught the conscience of Blackwood Manor." Chapter 8. The Echo of a Scream. The beam of Poirot's torch cut through the empty hallway, illuminating nothing but dust motes dancing in the air. The eerie voice had faded, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Elias Thorne was gripping the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. "It's Sarah," he whispered hoarsely. "She's come back. She's come for me." "It is not Sarah," Poirot said firmly, though his voice was low. "The dead do not wear shoes, monsieur, and they do not speak in riddles." He walked over to the small, muddy boots placed in the doorway. He picked one up. It was old, the leather cracked and worn. "Hastings," Poirot said, examining the sole. "Look at the wear pattern. The heel is worn down on the inside edge." "So?" I asked, bewildered. "I observed Mademoiselle Violette walking earlier. She has a slight limp. She favors her left foot. This shoe, it belongs to her, but from many years ago, or when she was a child. But Violet is a grown woman now," I argued. "Why would her old shoes appear?" "Because," Poirot said, turning back to the library, "the person haunting this house is not a ghost, nor is it Julian. It is a memory trapped in a living mind." He turned to Elias. "Monsieur Thorne, I need you to be honest. When Sarah died, was Violet in the room?" Elias looked down, shame coloring his pale cheeks. "Yes, she wouldn't leave. She held Sarah's hand until the end. She was only 12. She sat there for 2 days, refusing to eat, refusing to speak." "And after?" Poirot probed. "What happened to Violet?" "She changed," Elias muttered. "She became quiet, withdrawn. She started spending all her time in the garden or in the attic, talking to herself." Poirot nodded slowly. "The trauma of a child is a seed, monsieur. If it is watered with neglect, it grows into a twisted tree." "You think Violet did this?" I asked, shocked. "But she saved your life. She attacked Julian." "Precisely," Poirot said. "She attacked Julian because Julian was a threat to her game. Julian was the brute force, the blunt instrument. But the psychological terror, the whispers, the poetic notes, that was not Julian." Poirot began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back. "Here is the truth, mes amis. We have 2 mysteries entwined like vines. Mystery 1, the attacks on your life, the mask, the formaldehyde, the assault on Clara. That was Julian. He is a greedy, cruel man who wanted his inheritance now." "And Mystery 2?" I asked. "Mystery 2, the haunting," Poirot said. "The wreath with the poetic line, the misplaced keys, the children's shoes, the whispers about the debt. This was a separate campaign. A campaign not for money, but for justice. Justice for Sarah, I realized. Oui, Poirot said. Violet knew Julian was up to something. She heard him in the walls, because she herself moved silently through this house. She saw him making the mask, but instead of stopping him, she used him. Used him, Elias gasped. She amplified his terror, Poirot explained. Julian put a mask on the floor. Violet added the wreath. Julian cut the lights. Violet whispered the threats. She wanted you to suffer, Elias. She wanted you to feel the guilt of her mother's death. Julian wanted to stop your heart. Violet wanted to break it. But she is mad, Elias cried. She digs in the dirt. She talks to plants. Is she mad? Poirot asked softly. Or is she playing a role? The mad stepdaughter whom no one suspects, who can walk anywhere, hear anything, and be dismissed as a ghost. Suddenly, a soft clapping sound came from the French windows. We turned. Standing just outside on the terrace, bathed in moonlight, was Violet. But she stood differently now. The hunch was gone. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and dry. She wore a simple, dark coat. "Bravo, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice clear and calm. No lisp, no dreaminess. I underestimated the little gray cells. "Violet," Elias shouted, starting to rise. You ungrateful child." "Sit down, Elias," Violet said coldly. She didn't raise her voice, but the authority in it made him collapse back into his chair. "I am not a child. I stopped being a child the day you let my mother die to save a few £1,000. She stepped into the room. She looked at Poirot with a strange mixture of respect and defiance. Julian was a fool, Violet said. He was clumsy. He was going to kill Elias too quickly. I didn't want him dead, not yet. I wanted him to understand, to feel the fear she felt, the darkness, the hopelessness. So, you helped Julian? I asked. I didn't help him, Violet corrected. I haunted him too. I moved his tools. I stole his keys. I made him paranoid. Why do you think he was so sloppy? He was terrified that someone else was watching him. And I was. You played a dangerous game, mademoiselle, Poirot said sternly. You walked on the edge of a knife. And I would do it again, Violet said, her chin high. She pointed a shaking finger at Elias. Murdered my mother with neglect. The law couldn't touch him, so I became the law. And the attack on Clara? Poirot asked. Did you know about that? Violet's face softened slightly. No, that was Julian's madness. When I saw what he did to her, when I saw he was willing to kill, I knew the game had to end. That is why I gave you the key, Monsieur Poirot. I knew you would find the truth. You saved my life in the cellar, Poirot reminded her. I am not a killer, monsieur, Violet said quietly. I am just a daughter who remembers. Elias was weeping now, his face buried in his hands. I'm sorry, Violet. I'm so sorry. I was afraid of losing the money. I was afraid of being poor again. Violet looked at him with no pity, only exhaustion. Time is a thief, Elias. It stole my mother, and now it has stolen your peace. You will keep your life, but you will never sleep soundly in this house again. She turned to Poirot. The police are waiting outside to take Julian away. Will they take me too? Poirot looked at her, a broken young woman who had turned her grief into a weapon. He looked at the muddy shoes of the child she used to be. Technically, Poirot said slowly, twirling his mustache, placing a wreath is not a crime. Whispering is not a crime. Being creepy is not a crime. You assaulted no one. You stole nothing of value. He looked at Inspector Japp, who had just appeared in the doorway looking confused. Inspector, Poirot said, Mademoiselle Violet has been very helpful. She was, in fact, working undercover to expose her step-uncle's plot. A brilliant piece of amateur detective work, non? Japp blinked. Undercover? Her? Well, if you say so, Poirot. It saves me the paperwork. Violet looked at Poirot, stunned. Tears welled in her clear eyes for the first time. Go, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently. Leave this house. It is poison to you. Find a garden where the flowers grow for the living, not the dead. Violet nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the dirt on her cheek. She turned and walked out into the night, leaving the muddy children's shoes behind. Elias Thorne was left alone in his great, empty library, surrounded by his wealth and his ghosts. Come, Hastings, Poirot said, taking my arm. Our work here is done. The nightmare is over. But for Monsieur Thorne, I believe the insomnia has only just begun. Chapter 9. The Final Reflection. 3 weeks had passed since that stormy night in Hollow Creek. We were back in London, safe within the geometric precision of Poirot's apartment at Whitehaven Mansions. The fog of the countryside was replaced by the familiar smog of the city, and the silence of the moors by the comforting rumble of traffic. Poirot was seated in his favorite armchair, sipping a cup of rich, dark chocolate. On the table before him lay a letter written on inexpensive paper. So, I said, putting down the morning newspaper, Julian Thorne has been sentenced. Attempted murder, 20 years. And Clara? Madame Clara recovers, Poirot said, tapping the letter. Though her beauty is marred by the scar, and her vanity is marred by the scandal. She has filed for divorce, naturally. She will take half of what little fortune remains. And Elias? Poirot sighed. Elias Thorne remains in Blackwood Manor, a prisoner in his own castle. He has hired 3 night watchmen. He sleeps with the lights on. He has his money, Hastings, but he has paid a terrible price. He has bought himself a life of fear. It's a fitting punishment, I mused, living in that house alone. He is not entirely alone, Poirot corrected softly. He has his ghosts. The memory of what he did, or did not do, for Sarah will sit with him at every breakfast. I looked at the letter on the table. Is that from her? From Violet? Poirot nodded. He picked it up and handed it to me. The handwriting was elegant, devoid of the jagged madness she had feigned. Dear Monsieur Poirot, I am in Cornwall now. The sea air is very different from the damp earth of the manor. I have found work in a small nursery, tending to orchids. They are difficult flowers, but they bloom beautifully if you are patient. I do not miss the house. I do not miss the whispers. I think, perhaps, the little girl who lost her shoes has finally stopped walking. Thank you for seeing me. Not the ghost, not the mad woman, but me. Yours, Violet. I folded the letter, feeling a lump in my throat. She's safe. She is healing, Poirot said. Justice, Hastings, is not always about prison bars and gavels. Sometimes it is about allowing a bird to fly from its cage. You knew, didn't you? I asked. Even before she confessed, you knew she wasn't mad. I suspected, Poirot admitted. Madness is chaotic. Violet's actions were precise. The timing of the wreath, the placement of the shoes. It was a symphony of psychological warfare. Julian was playing the trumpet, loud and brash. Violet was playing the violin, sad, sharp, and cutting. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the London skyline. It is a tragedy of families, mon ami. The Thorne family was like a garden that had not been weeded. Greed, resentment, neglect. These things grew until they choked the life out of everything. Julian became a monster because he wanted gold. Elias became a victim because he hoarded it. And Violet became a phantom to survive it, I finished. Precisely. Poirot turned back, his green eyes twinkling with a hint of their usual mischief. But let this be a lesson to you, Hastings. Never trust a ghost that leaves footprints, and never trust a man who wears velvet jackets to breakfast. I laughed. I shall keep that in mind, Poirot. Now, Poirot clapped his hands together. Enough of this gloom. I have heard a rumor that a new chef has arrived at the Savoy. He claims to make a soufflé that does not collapse. I intend to investigate this claim with the utmost rigor. A new case? I grinned, grabbing my coat. The most important kind of case, Hastings, Poirot said, smoothing his mustache. A matter of taste. We walked out of the apartment, leaving the shadows of Blackwood Manor far behind us. But as we stepped into the crisp London afternoon, I thought of a girl planting orchids by the sea, and I hoped that finally the neighbor's nightmare was truly over. Chapter 10. The Garden of Truth. Setting. 1 year later, a sunny afternoon in a London park. The seasons had turned a full circle since the dark events at Blackwood Manor. London was currently basking in a rare, glorious summer. Hercule Poirot and I were seated on a park bench, watching ducks navigate a pond with far less elegance than my friend would have preferred. Poirot was attempting to feed the ducks, but in typical fashion, he was doing so with extreme precision, breaking the bread into perfectly equal squares before tossing them. "Order, Hastings," Poirot remarked, dusting crumbs from his gray trousers. "Even nature benefits from a little discipline. Look at that mallard on the left. He is greedy. He disrupts the system." "Speaking of disrupted systems," I said, pulling a folded newspaper from my pocket, "have you seen the obituary column today?" Poirot paused, a square of bread hovering in midair. "I try to avoid it, mon ami. It reminds me that my own time is finite. But your tone suggests a name I should know." "Elias Thorne," I read aloud, "passed away peacefully in his sleep at Blackwood Manor, aged 62. Poirot lowered his hand. He did not look surprised. "Peacefully? That is a kindness the universe has granted him, perhaps more than he deserved. But the heart, Hastings, it can only bear the weight of a heavy conscience for so long. The cracks were already there." "There is more," I continued. "The article mentions the disposition of the estate. It seems Julian Thorne, currently serving his sentence in Dartmoor prison, contested the will from his cell, but he lost. And who inherits the House of Shadows?" "Violet," I said. "Every penny, the house, the grounds, the remaining fortune. It's all hers." Poirot nodded slowly, his eyes closing for a moment as if savoring a complex wine. "The circle closes. The money that Elias hoarded to save himself, at the cost of Sarah's life, now goes to Sarah's daughter. It is poetic, is it not? I wonder what she will do with it," I mused. "That house, it's a monstrosity. If I were her, I'd burn it to the ground." "You are a man of action, Hastings. You see a fortress of evil. You wish to destroy it with fire. But Mademoiselle Violette, she is a gardener. She understands that even the most poisoned soil can be healed if one plants the right seeds." As if on cue, a young messenger boy approached our bench. "Excuse me, sirs, are you Monsieur Poirot?" "I am he." "Packet for you, sir. Sent special delivery from Cornwall." Poirot took the small brown paper package. He tipped the boy a shilling and waited for him to leave before opening it. Inside was a small wooden box and a letter. He opened the letter and read it silently, a small smile playing on his lips under his mustache. "Read, Hastings." I took the letter. "My dear detective, I heard the news about Elias. I felt nothing. No joy, no sorrow. Just a quiet release, like a heavy coat slipping off my shoulders. I have returned to Hollow Creek for one last time. Not to live, but to change things. I have signed the papers today. Blackwood Manor will no longer be a home for misers or ghosts. I have donated the house to the Children's Recovery Trust. It will become a convalescent home for children with respiratory illnesses, children like me, who need fresh air and care. The conservatory where I dug for secrets will become a classroom. The library where Elias hid will become a playroom. I am using the Thorne fortune to pay for the doctors and medicine that my mother was denied. Enclosed is a small token. I found it in the cellar, hidden behind a loose brick. I think Julian missed it. It belongs to the man who saw me when I was invisible. With gratitude, Violet." I looked into the wooden box. Nestled in straw was an antique pocket watch. It was gold, with an intricate engraving of a rising sun on the cover. "It is beautiful," I whispered, "and valuable." "It belonged to Elias's father," Poirot said, inspecting it. "Julian likely hid it there to steal later, but in his arrogance, he forgot it. But look at the time, Hastings." The watch was stopped. The hands were frozen at 11:55. 5 minutes to midnight, I noted. Non, Poirot corrected softly. 5 minutes before the new day. It is a symbol, Hastings. For years, the Thorne family lived in the midnight of their greed. But now, the sun rises. He slipped the watch into his waistcoat pocket. It sat heavily there, a tangible reminder of the case that had started with a lopsided egg and ended with the redemption of a lost soul. You know, Poirot, I said, leaning back and watching the ducks finally settle into a peaceful rhythm. You often say that crime is ugly, that it reveals the worst of human nature. It is true. Murder is an abomination. Greed is a sickness. But, I gestured to the letter, sometimes out of that ugliness, something good emerges. If Julian hadn't plotted, if Elias hadn't been haunted, Violet might never have found the strength to claim her inheritance and help those children. Poirot stood up, brushing off his coat. He adjusted his hat to a perfect angle. You are becoming a philosopher, Hastings. It is dangerous. Next, you will be growing a mustache. I laughed. Heaven forbid. Come, Poirot said, linking his arm in mine. The ducks are fed. The mystery is solved. The ghosts are laid to rest, and the children will breathe easy. It is a good day, and I believe that Soufflé at the Savoy is calling my name. And this time, mon ami, I promise you, it will be perfect. We walked away from the bench, leaving the park behind. The story of the neighbor's nightmare was over, replaced by the quiet, steady rhythm of life, justice, and the enduring hope of a new day.